I've spent 31 years in law enforcement, working across every possible scenario. As a retired Navajo Ranger, my job wasn't just about typical police work. We were different from the Navajo police. Our role was protecting the nation's resources, similar to National Park Service rangers. People often shared stories about strange encounters, weird tracks in the sand, unusual lights, whispers about Yanagoshi. Some folks don't believe these tales, but my partner and I treated every report seriously, investigating each like a standard crime scene. Respect was crucial. The moment someone feels you don't believe their story, no matter how bizarre it sounds, they'll shut down completely. I've witnessed things I can't explain. Tracks spanning 5 feet apart on a 40 dj slope. Lights that could completely drain our radio batteries. But nothing prepared me for one specific case. It began with a call from a man living on the forest's edge. Terrified, he thought he might have killed something. Just after sunset, he heard a noise outside, soft, like an animal digging through something. When he investigated, he saw a figure moving near his shed. Hunched over, it was rummaging through junk and dirt. Initially, he assumed it was a stray dog or coyote. Grabbing a 2x4, he approached to scare it away. Somehow, he managed to sneak close. As the creature continued digging, its back rhythmically rising and falling, he noticed strange details, coarse fur patches, grey-white skin cracked like old paint. Looking like a half-dead stray, he swung the board. The first hit connected. The creature tumbled into a pile of broken boards and buckets. What followed was chaos, dust and debris exploding with each strike obscuring everything. He heard a whimper after swinging repeatedly, believing he'd hit the animal's leg. Dust billowed upwards like ash while he kept striking, unsure if he was actually hitting the creature or just flailing around. He started yelling, "Get out of here!" trying to scare it off, and soon the whole area was a chaotic mess with debris scattered everywhere. When he finally stopped, the coyote dog fell into the dirt. Confident he'd killed it, he dropped the 2x4, wiped dust from his face, and went inside to get his wife. Together they returned outside, but the body had vanished. No tracks, no blood, just a lingering smell. He speculated that maybe it had limped away, standing confused while his wife grew angry. Eventually, they went back to bed. That night, he became severely ill. Worse than any flu, he experienced intense vomiting, cramping, diarrhea, and a high fever. By midnight, he couldn't even stand. His wife and son rushed him almost 100 miles through darkness to see a medicine man they knew would be available. The medicine man took one look at him and declared, "You inhaled the bad medicine." Before continuing, it's crucial to understand how bad medicine works with skinwalkers. This isn't a how-to guide, but a warning. The powder is created to harm someone physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It's deeply taboo, connected to death and evil. People claim this powder originates from corpses, graves, animal parts, or places with negative energy. It's more than poison, it's a fatal curse. That's why medicine men advise burning trash, avoiding night sweeping, and rejecting used items. Bad medicine targets personal DNA like hair, nails, and clothing, making it extraordinarily dangerous. The Navajo Nation holds stories that go beyond simple folklore. As a retired Navajo Ranger with over 3 decades of service, I've witnessed incidents that challenge rational explanation. This particular case began with a medicine man's intervention that likely saved a man's life. A rancher from a small community near Lower Greasewood, Arizona, found himself in a dangerous situation. The medicine man explained that when the man was exposed to a skinwalker's curse, he had inhaled a poison powder that would have killed him by morning if he'd sought help later. Through a healing ceremony involving songs and a special water mixture, the man felt as if a knife twisting in his gut had been suddenly removed. The man's son waited in the truck, asleep during the ceremony, but something unusual happened. The boy claimed to have seen a tall, dark figure following his parents into the hogan, a figure no one else noticed. After the ceremony, the medicine man warned the man never to speak the entity's name again. In my official report, I documented this as an attempted homicide by unknown means. On the Navajo Nation, witchcraft isn't just a legend, it's a real threat that can kill. Over years of experience, I've learned that you don't need to believe in these things for them to notice you. Discussing skinwalkers often triggers strange occurrences, and electronics fail, animals become nervous, and an inexplicable sense of impending danger emerges. I believe the boy's sensitivity to spiritual presences revealed something significant. Children are more tuned to spiritual dimensions, so parents should pay attention when a child seems unusually distressed or fixated on a particular space. After sharing such an experience, I always perform a smudging ritual. Once you start speaking their name, they begin to listen. The shadowy figure the boy saw was likely connected to whoever had cursed the man, attempting to disrupt the protective ceremony. This isn't just another Skinwalker story. It hints at discoveries that perhaps should remain unspoken, mysteries beyond common understanding. Would you like to hear more about such experiences? A man lived far from the highway, raising horses with no neighbors nearby. Night after night, he witnessed something extraordinary, a glowing orb that would slice across the sky and vanish straight into the side of a mesa, not over it, but seemingly inside it. Initially, his wife dismissed his claims, thinking he'd been out in the sun too long, so he bought a camera in Flagstaff and started documenting the strange phenomenon. The light was real, a bright orb. Eventually, his wife joined him, sitting together and waiting for it to appear, always following the same path and diving into the mesa as if entering some hidden doorway. One evening, the horses began making a distinctive sound of fear. Grabbing his flashlight, he stepped outside and noticed the air smelled unusual. On the far side of the corral, the same glowing orange object appeared. Like most people who work the land, he felt compelled to defend his livelihood when something strange threatened his animals. He held a pellet gun, quiet, cheap, and safe around livestock, and raised it to fire. The sound was unlike anything he'd heard before. The light jolted upward, shot straight up, and reappeared half a mile away before vanishing completely. From that night forward, his ranch was never the same. Footsteps seemed to circle the house. Coyotes watched from a distance. He would hear voices outside, but when he checked, no one was there. His wife called it bad medicine, something skinwalkers might use. One morning, he called me, his voice trembling. Whatever he'd shot, whatever was communicating, he shouldn't have. We went out to investigate, documenting everything, taking pictures of the place and animals. But nothing could explain the strange occurrences. We found mysterious circles in the dirt, with no footprints anywhere to be found. North at the ranch's north end, something felt off. A small pile of fine grey ash lay scattered, as if something had burned, without flame. Near the far fence line, we discovered a cluster of rocks arranged in bizarre shapes. His wife wouldn't go near it, keeping her distance and repeatedly warning us not to touch anything. The horses behaved unlike any animals I'd seen before. They refused to approach the area or be touched, especially near the corral's north end. One horse kept raising its head, blowing and staring intently at a spot we couldn't see. It was a disturbing scene suggesting an unknown presence or possible ceremonial site. Within weeks, he packed everything and sold the ranch, not just leaving town but driving all the way to the East Coast. When I asked why he traveled so far, he explained that going west would only bring him back to where everything happened. I've investigated murders, suicides and disappearances, but this case was different, creepy. I believe he disturbed something that night and became obsessed with understanding what he'd encountered. He kept talking about lights, ghost lights used by evil medicine men and skinwalkers. Those secrets happen in remote places, mountains and caves away from people. My advice? If you see something strange, leave it alone. The missus have long memories, and if a light or glow appears around you, pray it doesn't notice you. Fear is universal, striking both children and adults. Most adults rationalize it by getting water or using the bathroom. Children, though, can't explain their terror. They just know something waits in the darkness. I remember being about 4 years old. My bedroom was down the hallway, with a bathroom between my parents' room. My mom would leave the hall light on and keep my door slightly open, knowing I was scared of the dark, and would often wake to use the bathroom. The night I decided to turn off the light would haunt me forever. My eyes opened to complete darkness, a stark contrast to the usual illuminated room. A chill ran down my spine as I realized how unnaturally dark everything was. The urgent need to use the bathroom overwhelmed my fear, and I knew I couldn't wait. Sitting up, I placed my feet on the cold wooden floor. As I approached the slightly open door, something caught my eye. A figure stood motionless in the doorway. I froze, staring wide-eyed as the figure stared back. "Mom," I called out. No response. I called again, growing more terrified that this might not be my mother. I remained completely still. A sound echoed down the hallway. The hallway light flickered on and the figure disappeared. My mom rushed into my bedroom, asking what was wrong. I described what I saw, but when she checked the hallway, bathroom, and my room, nothing was found. She dismissed it as my imagination and walked me to the bathroom. I kept the door open, using the hallway light to guide me. The light was enough to illuminate most of the bathroom, so she saw no reason to turn on the additional light. With her standing by the door, I felt safe. But as I sat on the toilet, my eyes drifted to the mirror. There it was again, standing on the other side. I knew then that something lived here, something that only emerged in darkness. This wasn't the first strange experience of my life. Some were explainable, others were not. This particular story connects to my late grandfather and the summers I spent with my grandparents deep in the countryside, where houses were miles apart and woods stretched endlessly. I loved those summers. We'd only see each other during this time, as they would spend winters in Florida. My grandfather, who was half Blackfoot, would share stories passed down from his mother while we walked through the woods. It was from him that I first learned about skinwalkers. I've always had unusual dreams, often connected to my sporadic sleep patterns. These experiences seemed to weave together, hinting at something beyond my understanding. My grandfather battled cancer when I was 13, and it was a tough time. Medical technology wasn't as advanced back then, and doctors weren't optimistic about his chances. He was 82 years old, but looked only 50 because he'd always taken such good care of himself. Though he beat cancer that year, something changed in the following 2 years. He started to look different, skinny and skeletal, with an odd smell that seemed connected to his illness. This was strange because he had always been the most pleasant, peaceful man I'd ever known. He taught us about grace and forgiveness, never raising his voice or saying anything mean. But gradually he began to withdraw and speak in random, disconnected ways. His behavior became increasingly odd. He spent most of his time in his workshop or wandering through the woods, often using his walker and staring at treetops while humming, which was particularly strange because he'd been an excellent singer. Animals seemed drawn to him in an unusual way. I once saw him talking to a group of wild turkeys about sacrifice, standing near the salt lake where my grandmother used to draw deer while singing in German. The dream I've had repeatedly shows him standing where his backyard meets the woods, with 2 large bucks behind him telling me to follow. This dream has haunted me for years. On one occasion I was about 30 feet away when he turned, and his face looked distorted, his lips and nose seeming oddly positioned. But then he smiled, walked past me, and patted my shoulder. He became blunt and mean in a way that seemed almost deliberate, though he appeared unaware of how he was changing. It wasn't just his personality that was transforming, his entire presence seemed different. The man who once embodied kindness had become someone almost unrecognizable, and he disappeared into the house, glancing back at me with a smile. The turkeys vanished when I looked away. Something strange was about to unfold. My family can't agree on the details of my grandfather's death. Everyone tells a different story about how long it took to bring his ashes home. My grandmother herself isn't consistent with the facts. The day my brothers and I learned about his death is forever etched in my memory. We returned from school on a Friday, excited for the weekend. A simple note from my mother waited on the counter. "Grandpa is dead. Massive stroke. I'll be back at 6. She never was one for emotional sensitivity. My dad, who cried only once during the funeral, can't pinpoint when exactly my grandfather passed. He believes it was 5 years earlier. My siblings don't remember the note. My older brother, who destroyed the kitchen in a rage after reading it, seems to have forgotten our grandfather entirely. It feels like a mental block has descended on everyone. Sometimes he visits me in dreams, telling me to let go as he fades into the trees. Perhaps he's been gone all this time. Dreams carry deep significance. Never ignore what your subconscious might be revealing. I sought answers from my grandmother when the details started becoming unclear. Every time his name comes up, family members share conflicting stories. She sat me down in her kitchen with coffee, attempting to explain something. Suddenly, she forgot our conversation and acted surprised by my presence. She seemed to lose track of time, not realizing I'd been there for an hour. When she noticed my coffee, She asked how long I'd been around. I explained what we were discussing about Grandpa, but she claimed no memory and joked about getting old. I took her to dinner, hoping a change of scenery might help. As we left, I spotted a stag standing exactly where my grandfather used to stand. The animal watched me intently as I backed down the long driveway. Oddly, family photos of him had been mysteriously disappearing from our albums. I hung the last 3 photos of my grandfather in my living room where I could always see them. My dad started cleaning a pond on my grandmother's land after my grandfather passed away. He had always wanted my father to build something on the 80 acres he owned, and my dad, being a master carpenter, bought a bucket crane to work on the pond. My brothers and I would often join him. Near that part of the land, a neighbor who had lived there for about 50 years would sit outside with a shotgun and a pack of camels. He looked like the old man from Pet Sematary and always made me uncomfortable. We stopped by to ask how he was doing and if he had seen anything interesting. One time, he pointed out a plume of smoke near the area where we were working. We thought someone might have done something to the crane. When we hurried back, the crane was fine. In a small field within a clearing of trees, there was only ash and smoldering plants. Right in the center was something white. My older brother and I went to investigate. We found a perfectly intact bleach-white skeleton of an 8-point bug. All of this seemed so strange. I'm not saying this had anything to do with my grandfather, but a lot of weird things happened after he passed. I have a theory that something happened to him out in the woods, and something might have taken his place. I really hope I'm wrong. If I'm not wrong, I hope the skeleton in that fire was it, that my grandfather somehow took revenge from beyond. My grandmother always says he's out in the woods, watching over us and talking to the deer. Let me tell you about the last time I saw my grandfather. I was 13, visiting my grandparents during the summer. I had been at their house for over 2 weeks. Earlier that day, I had walked out to the pond with him. He was very quiet, which had become his norm. I've always been scared of spiders. There was a big spider web across part of the path, so I grabbed a stick to get rid of it. My grandfather suddenly gripped my wrist tightly and said something to me. "Don't destroy it. Everything in he world kills. Bo only O survive." My grandfather was a delivery person back in the 1930s. He joined the Air Force of Fire in World War II after America got involved. Despite being half German and half Blackfoo himself, he ended up marrying my grandmother no long after the war ended. He was very old, had dark skin, and had grey hair pretty much his entire life. He also loved nature and animals. And he was a spiritualist himself, believing in the power of nature rather than Jiao Bao. He never really talked about his beliefs unless he really pressed him. He never yelled or anything at all until Ho's last few years of his life. He did like drink a lullaby and smoke some camels, which if you the guy high I mentioned before, my had US been local hing or do. No, sure. All of his neighbors, I ever me did he same. He quite smoking in 9S, Bahen. He picked I back up about 10 years later. Jews a couple here and here. My grandmother herself was actually from Germany and lived in Berlin during the war. Only her and one of her 4 brothers survived the war of the whole family. He always said the animals had a specific smell he way, hey did hings, and for people of say he liked or work with his hands, and was himself a master carpenter, and often spoke about the value of hard work. He also spoke about some sort of hinger could walk inside a man. I don't know what kind of words he used for I because, apparently, skinwalker isn't the right word. Wendigo or Wendigo is a bly more familiar, and I could be he right one, he said. He spoke o' he animals. I lived in he woods, and old him, be careful of, he dear. He walked off, he path went around it, and started humming an old song. I remember he smell, he rawed meat suddenly happening, and my grandfather stumbled a bit. I asked if he was all right, and he just said I was I'm for me of go home and started heading back of the house. I followed. He walked past he front house when I went in and went over. He reline. I old my grandmother, I wanted to go home, and as we go in he car, he stood over by he sow lake with wobugs behind him. He was waving, and so I just waved back. He held his hand, like he wanted me to stop leaving, and he gestured for me. Oh, come. I shook my head as we headed around. He bend and he lost him ha. I ever saw him he earned around enter his way. He was the rewritten text. My grandfather was deeply spiritual, and he always enjoyed watching deer. He set up a salt lick right outside his house, probably so he could see them from the kitchen. I wonder if he intentionally told me about these deer encounters. Working at the casino, I learned some interesting things about spirits. During my first Halloween there, people warned me about evil entities. They explained that when you leave after your shift, you should tell the spirits to stay put and not follow you. That night, something unforgettable happened. While moving between buildings through a long hallway, I encountered a terrifying figure. It was a demon-like person dressed entirely in black, wearing a torn brown outfit with massive horns. What struck me most was that instead of feet, this being had hooves and walked upright. Standing incredibly tall, the figure didn't even look at me when I passed. But when I reached the end of the hallway and turned around, the creature was staring directly at me. Creepy doesn't begin to describe it. Some say evil spirits are drawn to places of temptation like casinos, with their alcohol, games, and entertainment. People have told me stories about supernatural occurrences. Some claim they witnessed someone distributing money, and anyone who accepted it mysteriously died. Others talked about skinwalkers and the horrific smell of rotting flesh. Was this a skinwalker, a witch, or an evil spirit? I'm from the reservation, and we have our own understanding of these phenomena. Maybe I'll never know the full truth about what happened around my grandfather's death. What do you think? I had been driving my truck late one night, coming back from a friend's party in Gallup to Chinley. I know these roads like the back of my hand, and I'm always careful. Nothing seemed unusual. I hadn't hit any roadkill or even sensed anything potentially dead under the hood. Days later, something bizarre started happening. When I opened my truck door, a smell so putrid hit me that I nearly vomited right there. It was overwhelming. I tried everything, opening windows for 3 full days, buying 4 bottles of Febreze, and spraying every inch of the truck's interior and underside until the bottles were empty. Strangely, the smell kept changing. The next day, it was even worse. I decided to leave the truck alone for 2 days. When I finally returned and opened the door, the smell had completely vanished, like it had never existed. No trace of Febreze, no odor, nothing. I've had this truck for 2 years now and started wondering if it might be a chemical leak. But everything seemed fine mechanically. Unsure what to do, I contacted my dad. He suggested a traditional approach, sage the truck inside and out, then sage myself and the entire property. This happened on the Navajo Reservation in Arizona, where part of my family still lives. Some relatives have moved away, including my family, who settled in a nearby town outside the reservation. I began the sage ritual, which quickly stopped after I completed it. Recently, I had a troubling dream that might be connected to my anxiety about this whole situation. To be honest, this is the first time I'm sharing this story outside my family. I can't help but wonder, was it just a dead mouse? Or something more? What do you think happened? Diane? Life on the Navajo Reservation during the early 90s was challenging. My grandparents lived in a home without running water, electricity or phone service, miles away from any conveniences. They raised sheep and maintained the land, embodying a simple lifestyle that was increasingly difficult to sustain. Droughts became more frequent, causing crops to wither and water pumps to fail. Often, an entire day would be spent collecting water for our family and neighboring communities. As my grandparents aged, the demanding tasks of caring for livestock and hauling water became increasingly difficult. Their children, including my dad, would take turns helping with these chores. But these responsibilities led to growing tensions. Arguments erupted about whose turn it was to fetch water or tend to the animals. One scorching day, a critical moment occurred when no one stepped up to collect water. The situation escalated tragically. My grandpa decided to get water himself. On his return journey, his trailer veered off the road, resulting in a fatal accident. This devastating event shattered family relationships, with siblings blaming each other and creating deep rifts that would last for years. The emotional toll was immense. I was profoundly affected, experiencing nightmares, and struggling to sleep. Guilt and anger permeated the family dynamics. Some blamed my grandmother for not taking sides, which led to further alienation. Aunts and uncles stopped visiting, and my grandmother chose to remain isolated, not out of resentment, but to avoid any perception of showing favoritism. The result was a fractured family torn apart by grief, responsibility, and unresolved emotional wounds. Our once close family unit had been fundamentally changed by this single devastating moment. She preferred people to visit her if they wanted to spend time together, refusing to go out with their children and choosing to spend weekends and social gatherings alone. None of her children could find peace knowing their mom was isolated. My dad seemed closest to her, communicating more than others, though family arguments often followed a predictable pattern. Years later, everyone would return, acting as if nothing had happened. Time might be lost, but memories always remained. On a Thursday morning near Christmas, a holiday we didn't really celebrate, we received a phone call. My grandma wanted to speak with my dad, sounding nervous. My dad always used the speakerphone due to hearing difficulties, which meant I could hear everything clearly. House phones back then offered little privacy, being restricted to a few feet from their base. She told my dad she felt sick and wanted to invite everyone over, emphasizing that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Suddenly, mid-conversation, she interrupted herself. "Wait a minute, son. There's something outside," she said, walking away and opening the door. Through the sound of wind, I heard her shouting and cursing, apparently trying to chase something away from the house. When she returned, she casually mentioned, "Sorry, son. That down dog is back, but no worries, I took care of it." This struck me as bizarre because my grandma was known for her deep love of dogs. She had 4 strays she'd rescued from the street and was incredibly compassionate toward animals. My dad asked, "What dog is that?" Her response was equally strange given her usual affection for canines. Here's a rewritten version. My mom had been talking about something serious on the phone. She seemed worried, mentioning someone lurking around our home. Without much explanation, she hung up quickly after a brief call with my dad. In the car, my parents had one of their hushed arguments, something they always did to keep us from hearing their discussions. We knew something was different this time. After their conversation, my dad went straight to his room, and my mum made another quiet phone call. Then she turned to me with unexpected news. We were spending the coming weekend at Grandma's. This surprised me, but I was happy. I hadn't seen my grandma much lately and missed our connection. She explained that Grandma was sick and shouldn't be alone. My mom revealed they'd already spoken with all the aunts and uncles. The plan was for me and my cousin Alex to go first thing tomorrow, with the rest of the family joining on Saturday morning. She explained that work at our stationery store, especially during our busy gift wrap and Christmas decor season, would complicate a full family trip. The next morning we set out on our journey. Neither of us had ever traveled to Grandma's by public transport before, but we managed to find our way. When we arrived, everything felt exactly the same, like time had stood still. Seeing Grandma again was incredible. We hugged, she cooked, and she shared stories about the old days, talking about sheep and land. That evening we sat together for dinner. The table was filled with traditional Navajo dishes, and for a moment, everything felt wonderfully simple and familiar. We were gathered around the table, the room filled with laughter and memories of our younger days. Everything felt perfect in that moment. Suddenly, the wind picked up, and the night grew dark. The dog started barking. Not just any bark, but the kind that tells you something is nearby. Anyone who's had a dog knows exactly what I mean. My cousin Alex peered out the window, staying quiet for a few seconds before returning to us. He looked pale, almost ghostly. "There's a dog trying to get in through the back garden door," Grandma said. She had a small garden behind her home, which explained the door leading outside. Alex spoke up. "There's a dog standing out in the distance." Grandma grabbed a machete and approached the door. "Stay inside, no matter what you hear," she warned. "This isn't a normal dog. It's been hanging around for days, and I've tried scaring it off, but it keeps coming back. I see something in its eyes. It wants more than just food." As she opened the door, we watched from the doorway. Grandma struck the door twice, trying to scare the dog away, but it didn't seem fazed. She walked towards it, and after just a few steps, the dog calmly turned and walked towards the hills as if nothing had happened. Grandma continued shouting curses. The dog's gaze was unsettling, evil, indifferent. We slowly retreated inside as the night closed in around us. Grandma's expression showed deep concern, though she attempted to reassure us. "We'll be fine," she said, her eyes telling a different story. "How has it been around for days without you calling the police or Dad for help?" She fell silent, her eyes reflecting both sadness and a strange sense of relief. "They wouldn't believe me," she finally said. "Your parents would think I'm just making an excuse to see you all. It's better this way." In that moment of silence, something unspoken hung in the air. "When everyone arrives tomorrow, we'll all gather with a specific purpose." "A purpose?" she had asked, her tone questioning. She then told us to go to bed, as it was getting late. We were staying in a small guest house at the back of the property. The guest house actually belonged to my uncle, who was Alex's dad and one of the last to leave. After he moved out, he had built a 2-room house near the fence where he lived for a few years. Now it stood empty, though some furniture remained. As we gathered our things and headed towards the guest house, a chill settled in the air. I'd forgotten how dark it gets out here in the forests, so different from the city's constant illumination. The wind had died down, and the dogs were now quietly huddled close to the house. We settled into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Teenagers alone without parental supervision rarely have peaceful nights. Lying there, I found myself pondering Grandma's words and the fear I'd seen in her eyes. "Hey, Alex," I whispered. "What do you think Grandma meant when she said we'll all be together for a purpose?" No response. Alex was already fast asleep. I continued thinking about how long it had been since we'd been here, and how exciting tomorrow would be with the rest of my cousins arriving. Just as I was drifting off, something caught my attention. Something outside. I heard what seemed like a person's breathing near the window. Alex snored, completely unaware. Moving carefully, I crouched to check the window. It was securely closed, but something was definitely outside. I left the room and went to the other side, which faced my grandmother's house. I wanted to check if everything was all right, especially to see why the dogs weren't barking. Looking out, I saw one dog sound asleep by my grandmother's door. Her light was on, clearly visible. Then something else caught my eye. A few meters away at the back of the house, standing in front of my grandmother's window, was something unusual. A dog standing on 2 legs, peering through the window. It was almost the size of a tall person, and then I turned it to Ted. It was late at night when I got really scared and ran back to the room where my cousin Alex was sleeping. I woke him up, alarmed, and told him the dog was back and trying to get into our grandma's house. He told me to go back to sleep, saying I was probably just seeing things, but then we heard the breathing. Something was right outside the guest house. I motioned for Alex to get up quietly. We put on our jackets and sneakers over our pajamas and stood by the door. I told him our plan. Run to Grandma's house, don't look back, keep our eyes straight ahead, and just keep running. We counted to 3 and took off. Even though I didn't look back, I heard sounds moving behind the house. The whole time I was praying the garden door would be unlocked. As we got closer, Grandma opened the door. But before we could reach her, she started shouting, "You're not welcome here. You're not welcome here." She closed the door, and no calls were made to the police or our parents. Shaking, we went inside, and when she returned, I asked, "Grandma, what was that?" She looked at us and said, "That was Yanagoshi. I know you've been seeing him in your dreams, and it's after the family." When I asked what she meant, she continued, "I know you've been having nightmares. These things are real. Your parents have been seeing the dog as well." She then burned some cedar around us and said, "Creator will be with us tonight. Get some sleep. We're all going to stay here in the living room." The next morning, my parents were already there, and Alex's parents had arrived. More uncles and aunts kept coming. It was December 23rd, but it felt like Christmas. Everyone was acting like they were preparing for some sort of party. Uncles were cooking outside, aunts were cooking inside, and kids were playing. Grandma stood, watching everyone. My Uncle Max arrived with his very obedient dog. After greeting everyone, he quickly went towards the hills with his dog. Sure, something felt different that day. Maybe it was the first time our entire family had gathered together, or perhaps it was just my nerves making everything seem strange. My siblings didn't seem bothered, though. They were outside playing the whole time. As the afternoon wore on, one of my older cousins approached us. He asked if we knew why we were all there, then immediately began explaining without waiting for an answer. He talked about a skinwalker and a curse on our family, connected to what happened with Grandpa and a dog. Chills ran down my spine as he described how Grandpa had confronted a man he believed was responsible for our family's misfortunes. In a moment of anger, Grandpa had beaten this man, leaving a permanent mark on his face. Fear was evident in my cousin's eyes as he continued. Grandma believed that all our tragedies and strange events, including Grandpa's fatal accident, were linked to this curse. The Skinwalker had specifically cursed Grandpa around water, knowing its importance to our family. He claimed we would always struggle with water, either having too little or too much, and that this would be the source of our greatest challenges. My uncle called out, interrupting the story, and then left. Alex turned to me, asking what I thought. I wasn't sure, but I knew Grandma was right. The dreams of Grandpa's death haunted me, always accompanied by a dog standing in the fields, watching silently. As night fell, the adults gathered everyone together. My dad began speaking about a ceremony they had been planning, recommended by Grandma and the elders. A medicine man was on his way to cleanse our family and restore peace. Not everyone seemed to know about this plan, and people exchanged uncertain glances. We were instructed to sit near the fire and wait, the tension palpable in the air. The fire crackled in the center of our circle. A man arrived whom I didn't recognize, wearing traditional native clothing with painted face. The second man accompanied him, carrying a large drum. The medicine man first greeted my grandmother, speaking to her in Navajo. She nodded in response. Then he motioned for us to gather closer around the fire. He carefully laid out several objects on the ground: a feather, herbs, water, stones, a tobacco pipe, and a drum. Softly, he began chanting. The only sounds were the crackling fire and his quiet murmurs. Herbs were sprinkled into the flames, creating fragrant smoke that swirled around us. Using a feather dipped in water, he walked the circle, waving it in a cleansing motion over our bodies. The medicine man took a slow draw from the tobacco pipe, and we watched the smoke curl upward, blending with the herbal smoke from the fire. He passed the pipe to my grandmother, who took a draw before handing it to the next family member. As the pipe circled around us, the other man picked up the drum and began playing slowly. With each beat, the wind seemed to rise. The medicine man's chanting grew louder, his voice rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern. Suddenly, the dog from earlier appeared at the edge of the firelight. Standing on two legs with glowing eyes, it began circling us. The drum beats quickened, and the medicine man's voice became more intense and urgent. The air felt thick and heavy. Every drum beat and chanted word echoed in my head. The dog circled closer as we huddled together. The medicine man's voice rose to a crescendo, the drum beats becoming a rapid, pounding rhythm. Then he took out small bundles and bags containing beads, continuing the ceremony. Nanti threw some stones into his fire. The fire flared up, and his dog let out a screech. The drum beat was growing. The wind started blowing, and for a moment it seemed as if the very ground beneath us was shaking. His fire flared up again. The dog then let out one final screech and disappeared into the darkness. Then everything went still. The wind died down. The fire returned to a steady burn, and here was nothing but silence over us. He drum and he singing began to die down, slowing a calm and steady beat. He medicine man stood before us. His face looked very exhausted, weak, almost like he was going, pass out. That's when he other man he had come with helped him stand and sit down. We stood here silent, and he medicine man said, "Everyone be at peace. Remember, honor your ancestors." He continued, "Keep your memory and air wisdom alive. They will always watch over you." With that, all of our parents started standing up, and we made our way back to he house. The whole environment felt different now, almost like we were safe. We all ended up sleeping all over he house. Some of us in he living room, others in he hall, others in he dining room. He next morning, as we gathered for breakfast, he medicine man joined us. His presence, now familiar, felt different. He took a seat and began to explain more about he curse. The Skinwalker was attached to all of you because of he emotions and pain surrounding her husband's passing, he said, pointing over my grandma. When he died, he grief and unresolved anger among you created a fertile ground for he curse take root and grow stronger. Emotions like pain and anger are basically breeding grounds for he's forces. They can attract and feed evil spirits and curses. He stopped for a second, letting his words sink in. We listened. understanding his seriousness of it. The Skinwalker was thriving on everything surrounding y'all's family. Every argument, every moment of grief was an opportunity for Ikersao deepen its hold. It wasn't just he physical presence of he Skinwalker how was bothering you all, but all he emotions as well. We not only got rid of he Skinwalker, but also began he process of healing Ho's deep emotional wounds. Grandma nodded with tears in her eyes. We have let our pain and anger fester for too long, she said. It's time we start healing as a family. The medicine man smiled gently. The ceremony was about more than just removing a curse. It was a process of restoring balance and harmony within our family. We had done our part, and now it was time for everyone else to do theirs. The message was clear. Embrace forgiveness, love, and understanding. But most importantly, this was a moment for healing and recovery. We spent the morning talking and sharing stories about Grandpa, remembering the good times and the lessons he had taught us. There was a sense of hope and renewal in the air. I felt like we were truly a family again. Throughout the day, we all helped clean up and put things back in order. The medicine men stayed with us, guiding us through small rituals and teaching us how to protect our hearts and home. We took turns visiting Grandma, and I believe she was never alone again. She passed away the following year, and after her funeral, we never gathered together again. I doubt we'll ever spend another holiday as a group, but I know my cousins and I still remember that night in our own ways. You might hope for a happy ending about how we embraced and forgave one another, and to some extent we did. But some things can't be easily forgotten or resolved. After Grandma's passing, everyone went their separate ways and became distant again. One of my uncles and aunts continued to dispute over property, which is a whole other story. We contacted the same medicine man my father had a good relationship with. He counseled us and advised that we can only do our part. As far as someone's bitterness is concerned, only they themselves can find peace. You can help, but if someone doesn't want assistance, nothing will work. I heard from my cousin Alex that his father started down a different path. He began bringing strange men to perform unconventional ceremonies, would disappear for days, and hung weird things around the house. It was sad to hear about. Eventually, Alex's parents divorced and separated. My story isn't long, and I've been unsure whether I should share it. My dad was the nicest person I ever knew, always trying to help those in need, even when it seemed to work against him. He was always willing to lend a hand. I clearly remember what he told me about one night when he was driving home from work. I was around 11, and he was running late, hoping at least to find my mother awake. Back then, without cell phones, he couldn't warn us about any delays. Our city has woods on the north side that stretch about a 20-minute drive through dense forest, an area we'd actually camped in before. As he was driving through the darkest part, he came across a broken-down car with a man and a young kid asking for help. My dad, always going out of his way for others, thought it was risky but couldn't leave them stranded. He pulled up and talked to the man who needed to change a tire. They had a tire but needed a jack since theirs was broken. When my dad opened his trunk, he got his jack and noticed something odd. The kid, around 5 or 6, was walking towards the tree line, which wasn't far away. My dad thought this was strange. The child should have been asleep. He yelled a warning about potential danger, but the kid didn't listen. The father seemed too focused on the tire to pay attention. My dad placed the jack under the car and handed the tool to the man to loosen the lug nuts. As for my aunt, I'm uncertain. She simply disappeared from our lives. And I often wonder what became of her. The path to healing is ongoing. While the curse was lifted, each family member's journey to peace and understanding remains deeply personal. Nighty was working on loosening lug nuts, grunting with effort, when my dad noticed something odd. A kid was wandering among the trees, moving from one to another like he was playing an eerie game of hide and seek. The child laughed and poked his head out from behind the pines, watching them intently. You know he could get hurt with all this underbrush, my dad called out, hoping the man would pay attention to his child. The man barely heard him, focused entirely on the tire. What did you say? He asked, not looking up. Suddenly the kid ran and got into the car. My dad saw his face. Something seemed off. The kid kept staring, and then his expression changed. It wasn't just a look, but a creepy, almost evil smirk that sent chills down my dad's spine. After helping change the tire, they rolled it to the trunk. The kid pressed his face against the passenger window, watching intensely. Weirdo, my dad muttered. The man was grateful. 3 cars had passed without stopping, and he was relieved my dad had helped. There's no way I was going to leave you stranded out here, the man said, especially since it's so dark and late. As they prepared to part ways, my dad noticed something strange. The kid was no longer in the car. Walking back, he called out, "Don't." His eyes went wide, almost bulging. "What kid?" he stammered. "I've been here alone this whole time." A whistling sound broke the tension. They turned to see a silhouette, a young kid just standing among the trees, staring. My father immediately told the men they needed to leave. They sped off, stopping at a gas station about 10 minutes later, both shaken by what they'd just experienced. When I was young, my aunt would burn tobacco, and my grandma said her father would use old rags to start a fire. One of my tribes burned Angelica root, but now many people have forgotten these old ways and use sage instead. An elder from a neighboring tribe told me to hang pepperwood leaves by the doorways because they're always trying to find a way in. If you're hearing my story, I'm sharing this wisdom so you can smudge afterwards. What I'm about to share could cause harm because they're always listening. Use a feather or at least your hand. Never blow, as you might add, negativity to the smoke. Open a window to let negative spirits leave. Smudge yourself thoroughly before moving through the house, telling spirits they don't belong here. Most importantly, always return the ashes to the land. You're giving back what you took, and throwing it in the garbage is disrespectful. I lost a cousin to suicide because he couldn't handle the visitation of evil things. He was a great guy who cared deeply for his livestock. We went to school together, and he was funny and caring. Once, I was riding a green broke horse that fell and rolled over me. My dad told me about an encounter that still haunts him. They were driving when he noticed something strange. After stopping, they talked for a few minutes before going their separate ways. He said that if the kid hadn't appeared, he wouldn't have stopped. The man mentioned hearing a child laughing when his tire blew out, though he thought he was just hearing things. My dad always insisted the story was real, calling it the scariest experience of his life. We stopped camping in that area and even avoided driving through the north side of the city, taking longer routes instead. It's been about 30 years, but they're still listening. They're always around us. Be careful out there. You never know what's lurking in the dark. He was always around me, helping me a lot, especially with handling horses. I'd see him riding in the distance, rounding up his livestock. But he was struggling with something deeper. His troubles began when he borrowed his dad's truck and didn't return home as expected. He tried sneaking back by turning off the headlights while navigating a turn. When he switched them on, he claimed several skinwalkers stood by the roadside. Waiting, he gunned the truck home, and they pursued him. He leaped out and ran inside. Multiple times, he described encountering these entities while riding his horse across the AO, a deep and wide landscape. They were always present. The experiences overwhelmed him, leading to heavy drinking. His parents, now Christian, urged him to pray. He tried, but nothing changed. He seemed increasingly desperate, seeking help from cousins who had no solutions. This happened in the late 70s, a time when depression was poorly understood. Many were drinking to cope with similar emotional struggles. Though I was young, I didn't recognize the depth of his pain. I too was dealing with neglect and early exposure to alcohol. For years, he wandered Gallop streets, gradually selling his livestock until only a few remained. He would tell my parents about constant skinwalker visits. By his late 20s, he took his own life. My grandmother said these entities watched him nightly. His family didn't believe his claims until the night he shot himself. The next day, his parents found a milk crate under his window, with animal tracks leading to the IO, mysteriously transforming into human tracks. After his death, relatives discussed a potential curse, suggesting someone jealous might have targeted him. They believed these skinwalkers were hired to torment him, not as flesh-eating monsters, but as fear-inducing entities. His openness, due to depression, created a cycle of terror he couldn't escape. Not the death of my cousin was a result of his deep struggles with depression. His family discovered a small bag near where he took his life, containing some strange beads and personal items, including pieces of his shirt. My connection to my roots and culture wasn't strong growing up. Everything I learned came from creators, the land, and other family members who shared their stories and wisdom. My parents, like my cousins, had become Christian, and didn't teach me much about our traditional beliefs. My cousin had been experiencing terrifying nightmares where he would wake up surrounded by individuals with covered faces. In one particularly disturbing dream, one figure remained uncovered with a demonic face. These weren't just ordinary dreams. In Navajo culture, we understand that depression is real, but so are spiritual entities like tricksters. They don't simply disappear. When you have dreams of attacks, we believe skinwalkers are present, and such dreams signify approaching sickness. It's crucial to seek a medicine man for cleansing and addressing underlying spiritual issues. My cousin's grandmother believed that a proper spiritual cleansing might have helped him find peace. The spiritual and physical worlds are deeply interconnected, and healing often requires addressing both realms. I won't entertain statements about him being in a better place. Our culture has specific ways of understanding and respecting death that differ from Americanized perspectives. Decades after his death, I began experiencing my own unsettling dreams and nightmares about my cousin. By then, I was married with grown children. I tried smudging my family and our home, but nothing seemed to work. One specific dream became the turning point in my spiritual journey. On an ordinary night, I knew something was wrong, as elders had warned me about such experiences. The dream itself was a clear sign that I needed to seek guidance and understanding. I thought I had woken up in bed, but these three spirits, or perhaps demons, looked human and stood right at the edge. They stared directly at me. One climbed over the bed while the other two went around, and suddenly they started pushing their hands into my stomach and chest. The pain was intense, and I tried to wake up, but I couldn't. I would briefly wake, only to realize I was still trapped in the same terrifying experience, almost stuck in a continuous loop. My wife even heard me yelling for help during one of these episodes. She suggested we reach out to one of the local elders. A medicine man came to our house and spent the entire day asking questions. Now I understand he was trying to uncover the root cause of everything. I shared details about my cousin's experience and the entire situation. He carefully examined the house and asked if anyone might want to harm me or was jealous of me. We both answered no. He proposed performing a group ceremony with other individuals, which eventually happened. I won't describe the ceremony in detail, as these are personal journeys and what occurs remains private. After the ceremony, the medicine man counseled us traditionally. Recognizing I wasn't raised in these customs, he advised me to always seek guidance, emphasizing that we're constantly learning and they are always watching. Before leaving, he noticed our bare walls and gave specific instructions. Buy arrows, hang them on the walls, and place the bow in the center of the house away from the door. He told us to position an arrow at each doorway, angled and pointing outward, ensuring they face the sun's direction. These arrows serve as protection against bad medicine, blocking evil from entering while you sleep. The belief is that anything attempting to enter will be deterred, thinking someone is waiting in the darkness with a drawn bow, ready to release an arrow. When it comes to smudging, there's more to it than just burning sage. It's not a simple YouTube tutorial you can master overnight. Elders conduct these ceremonies for specific reasons, and where you get the sage matters. Blessed by traditional practitioners, smudging is a deeply spiritual practice. The process requires careful intention and visualization. You can't just walk around waving smoke and expect results. Start by smudging yourself before entering a space. Create a good amount of smoke and enter from the left side of the home, moving through completely and exiting on the right. Prayer is crucial during this process. Ask the Creator to protect you, your family, and your home. Depression and negative energies are real threats. Some people intentionally send harmful energies to those struggling, potentially even invoking something as serious as a skinwalker curse. Negative entities can latch onto you, especially if you feel comfortable with their presence. This might stem from unresolved personal issues like depression or addiction. Remember, no one can control your spirit unless you allow it. My cousin's experience demonstrates the dangers of ignoring these spiritual warnings. He didn't seek help or counsel when confronted with these supernatural visitations. The malicious intent of someone so jealous they'd curse another person reveals a deeply disturbing human capacity for harm. Imagine enduring terrible dreams and skinwalker manifestations continuously. These entities take pleasure in destroying lives. They're not just myths or stories, they're real threats that go beyond physical harm. Skinwalkers aim to torment you psychologically, breaking your spirit in ways far more insidious than physical attack. The Bible has always been a powerful source of guidance in my family's life. My parents, who became devoted Christians, instilled in me a profound respect for its teachings. I remember my father often quoting a verse that has stayed with me: "The heart is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things." Growing up in the Sierra Nevada, I spent countless weekends hiking and enjoying the breathtaking landscape of sprawling pines and pristine lakes. While I wasn't an avid camper, these outdoor adventures were a significant part of my childhood. One particular summer, about 10 years ago when I was 16, an unforgettable experience would change everything. My cousin Celia had returned from her first year of college, accompanied by her boyfriend Jay, who was eager to explore the area. They decided to take a hike on one of our favorite trails, a moderate path with a gentle incline that offers stunning views of Lake Tahoe. Jay, with some hiking experience, was excited about the challenge and the panoramic scenery. The trail was an in-and-out route, typically taking 2-3 hours to reach the peak and the same time to descend. Various smaller trails branched off, offering steeper routes or alternative paths down to the lake. We thought this would be a perfect adventure for Jay to experience the region's natural beauty. People often advise following your heart, but sometimes the heart can be the most dangerous part of human nature. The events that happened to my cousin could happen to anyone, to you or me. These experiences have taught me the importance of seeking help and support when facing mental struggles. The enemy is always watching, looking for any vulnerability in your life. An open window, an unguarded door. Closing these metaphorical openings takes time and effort, but it's crucial to seek counsel if you're dealing with depression or other mental health challenges. I've changed some details to protect privacy, but the core of this story remains true. While I'm not ready to share every detail, I'm willing to provide more information to those who are interested. Looking back, I realize how interconnected these experiences are and how they all trace back to that pivotal moment. 3 of us set off on the hike that first Saturday of his visit. Though the trail wasn't easy to locate, it was really popular with locals due to its stunning views and lack of tourists. Finding the route was challenging since the main hiking website wasn't very helpful. We passed just a few other hikers, mostly couples with camel backwater packs walking their dogs. Reaching the top quickly, we settled in to enjoy our lunches with a spectacular lake view. Jay was particularly impressed, spending lots of time capturing photographs. Between taking selfies and eating sandwiches, we relaxed and got to know each other. After about an hour, something unexpected happened. A distant mountain lion scream pierced the silence. If you've never heard this sound, it's truly unnerving. Imagine a terrifyingly loud shriek that resembles a woman's blood-curdling cry of terror. This wasn't a good sign. Mountain lion screams typically signal either mating rituals or territorial fights between males. The fact we heard one meant multiple lions were nearby and quite close. While Sierra bears might be relatively harmless, mountain lions are different. They'll attack humans, pets, and even cyclists without hesitation. Jay was particularly unsettled. Coming from an area without such large predators, the thought of being potential prey was deeply uncomfortable. Celia and I were alert but not overly frightened. Having experienced various natural disasters and close wildlife encounters, we'd become somewhat desensitized. We'd seen plenty of bears and snakes on previous hikes, understanding that wildlife interactions are part of experiencing nature's beauty. This wasn't our first mountain lion encounter. We'd seen them before, mostly from safe indoor locations. We even recalled a childhood incident where we'd attempted to lure a mountain lion by leaving expensive steaks in the backyard, a plan that failed and only annoyed my mother. Reassuring Jay but recognizing the potential danger, we quickly packed our lunch remains and descended the mountain at a faster pace. Safety was our priority, and the mountain lion's proximity demanded a swift retreat. Not about 50 minutes after Celia and Jay left to retrieve Jay's forgotten phone, I found myself alone on the trail. My task was to warn potential hikers about lions in the area, especially those with off-leash dogs who might be at risk of an attack. Though not an ideal situation, this seemed the best option at the time. I settled on a shaded rock just off the trail, passing time by scrolling through our earlier photos and playing Temple Run. With no cell service, I expected them back soon. Suddenly, a familiar scream pierced the air. At first, it was hard to gauge the distance, but it felt closer than before. Sitting alone in the woods, I began to feel increasingly vulnerable. Group safety is crucial when mountain lions are around, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was perfect prey. 20 minutes later, another scream rang out. This time, there was no doubt it was much closer, seemingly coming from the trail where Celia and Jay would be returning. Logically, I knew lions don't vocalize while hunting. Their stalking is silent. The screaming suggested something other than predatory behavior, but this knowledge did little to calm my growing anxiety. My senses heightened. Every rustle, every potential movement caught my attention. I switched on my flashlight despite the daylight and moved to the middle of the trail, ensuring I could see in all directions. The screams continued, each one closer than the last. Goosebumps covered my skin. A deep sense of dread settled in my stomach. Searching for the safest position, I wedged myself against a tree near my original rock. From here, I maintained a clear view up and down the trail and into the surrounding trees. Then, about 20 feet up the trail, something stood completely still. In these parts, it's easy to get disoriented. People often panic when the weather shifts, making their attempts to find their way back even more challenging. The wilderness can quickly turn someone confused and slightly unhinged, especially when they're alone, without food or water. Suddenly, he was just standing there, a completely naked man, filthy and skinny. I didn't even hear him approach. It was like he materialized out of nowhere. My first thought was that he must be a lost hiker who'd been wandering for a long time and needed help. I remembered hearing about hypothermia causing people to strip off their clothes, though I'd later realized this made no sense during the summer. As I started walking towards him, something felt deeply wrong. The hair on my neck stood up. About 15 feet away, an overwhelming sense of dread stopped me in my tracks. He didn't look right. He didn't feel right. My initial impulse to help had transformed into pure terror. When I asked if he was okay, he looked directly at me. Then he opened his mouth and screamed. Not a human scream, but a high-pitched mountain lion shriek that froze my blood. In that moment, I realized we had likely been heard the entire time. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever experienced. I started screaming too, caught between wanting to run and not daring to turn my back. Just as suddenly, he closed his mouth, spun around, and disappeared into the trees with shocking speed. The feeling of wrongness lingered. I felt nauseated. When Celia and Jay arrived 5 minutes later, I explained what happened. Celia, who'd seen her share of strange things, turned ghostly white hearing my account. Apparently they hadn't heard a thing on their way down. We agreed to report this to the rangers when we got cell service. Now I am an outdoors guy who grew up in the middle of nowhere. I spent countless hours exploring the backcountry, but now I'm settled in the suburbs with a wife, 2 boys, a dog, and a typical office job. Even though I've embraced suburban life, I want my kids to appreciate nature like I did. When my oldest son turned 5, I was thrilled to take him on our first father-son camping trip. My wife and younger son stayed home, and I was determined to make this a memorable bonding experience. I didn't want anything too extreme, so I found a dispersed camping area in the Colorado Front Range that wasn't too remote, but still offered an authentic camping experience. Just a tent, sleeping bag, and campfire. Something happened on that trip that has haunted me ever since. Was it a mentally ill, lost hiker who needed help, or something else entirely? My friend Celia insists it was a skinwalker, something mimicking a mountain lion's call and stalking us down the mountain. When the rangers asked me to describe the person, I realized how little I could actually recall. He was thin with dirty blonde or brown hair, and his face had an odd shape. Strangely, he didn't have much of a beard, which seemed unusual given his apparent condition. What truly unnerved me was how unnaturally still he was. The rangers said they would check my description against missing persons reports, but I never heard back. What struck me most was how quickly he seemed to move. Impossible for someone who appeared dehydrated and disoriented. I don't go hiking much anymore, especially in that part of the country. If anyone has insights into what we might have encountered, I'd appreciate hearing your thoughts. Stay safe out there. Now we had an incredible first camping trip perfect for a preschooler. The campground was spacious enough that other campers were completely out of sight and earshot. My son and I set up camp, collected firewood, and went hiking, spotting a moose and a bobcat along the way. We tried a bit of fishing, and as the sunlight faded, returned to our campsite to light a fire. We enjoyed a traditional camping meal of fire-roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, creating memories we'd both cherish. After all the day's activities, we were completely exhausted. The summer breeze rustling through the pine trees was more soothing than any commercial sleep aid. I don't remember falling asleep, but it was one of those deep, dreamless slumbers that only physical exhaustion can bring. My son inherited many traits from me: hair color, eye shape, but one thing he got from his mother was sleep talking. It's not unusual to hear him having full conversations in his sleep, especially when he's really tired. Something jolted me awake in the middle of the night. The world seemed peaceful, just me and the breeze through the treetops. Initially, I couldn't understand what had disrupted my sleep. Then I heard my son's deep belly laugh. Must have been a fun dream, I thought. Gently rocking him seemed to quiet him down. But then he burst out laughing again. This time, his laugh was echoed by something outside our tent. I held my breath and listened, unsure of what I'd heard. It wasn't an echo. Something out there was laughing in unison with my son. My grogginess vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. It couldn't be real. It had to be my imagination. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening to the night. After a minute, hearing nothing, I started to relax. Checking the time, I saw it was 4 o'clock in the morning. The sun would be up in a couple of hours. That's when my son laughed again and was answered by another laugh from outside. I was now certain it wasn't an echo, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. Here's the rewritten text. A voice outside called my son's name, and my blood went cold. I recognized that voice. It was my younger son's. But that was impossible. He was safe at home with my wife, miles away. Twigs started crunching beyond our tent. Something was definitely circling us, though I couldn't pinpoint its exact location. Then I heard it call out again in a little toddler voice. My 5-year-old son, fast asleep beside me, suddenly called to his brother, asking him to play. The thing outside laughed and urged my son to come out. Its voice sounded my son's, but it was different. Cold and hollow, almost lifeless. Adrenaline surged through me. Cold sweat formed on my face. Fear gripped me, but my protective instincts kicked in hard. I was in full Papa Bear mode. Nothing was going to harm my child. When you're camping miles from civilization, you can't take chances. Wild animals, strangers, you have to be prepared. I always bring a gun camping. Pepper spray and bear bells help, but nothing stops a threat like the sound of a round being chambered. I shouted into the night, announcing my weapon and intent. I hoped my aggression masked my terror. Only silence answered. The breeze whispered through treetops. My son slept on. We'd often joked he could sleep through a tornado. Stepping out into the cool summer night, gun in one hand and flashlight in the other, I surveyed our campsite. The fire had died to embers. Fishing gear leaned against the truck. Firewood remained neatly stacked. Nothing seemed out of place. I sat near the tent entrance, unwilling to stray far from my son. Waiting in darkness, I suddenly heard a branch break. Then another, closer this time. I stood, sweeping my light towards the sound, but saw nothing. The voice called again, this time from behind, directly focused on me. "Daddy! Daddy!" it cried. My youngest son's voice, echoing from the dark forest. I swung my light beam toward the sound. That's when I saw them. A pair of shimmering green eyes. No, my flashlight caught 2 green eyes just a few feet above the ground, level with my youngest child's height. They were unblinking, fixed in place. As I moved closer, the thing seemed to absorb my light, almost like a black hole. No matter how near I got, I couldn't discern its size, shape, or color. Only those 2 piercing eyes. Suddenly, it began laughing in a toddler's voice, filled with malice. Its gaze never wavered from me. I stepped forward again, and it remained motionless. Desperate, I screamed and waved my arms to scare it away. The eyes then shimmered, shifting from green to amber, and started rising. What I thought was crouching was actually standing, growing until it reached nearly 10 feet high. The night air erupted with a deep growl that vibrated through my entire body. Though I couldn't see a mouth, I heard teeth snapping. My son's scream from the tent broke the creature's focus, momentarily diverting its attention. Without thinking, I fired my gun into the air. The eyes vanished instantly. Growls turned to shrieks, followed by crashing branches and undergrowth. I stood frozen until the sounds disappeared. Twilight began illuminating the forest as I sat in the dirt, shaking and exhausted. "Daddy, where are you?" my child shouted. Collecting myself, I entered the tent, retrieved my son, and quickly packed up. By the time the sun broke, we were back on the road. I have no idea what that thing was, but I plan to return without my family and definitely with some friends. I want to learn more about this mysterious encounter. Thankfully, my son seems unaffected by that night's events. Here's the rewritten text. Our property stretches across 13 acres where suburbs give way to farmland. My parents occupy the main house near the road, while my fiancé and I have transformed one of the back barns into our home. We've set up our house and another barn in a wide clearing, completely surrounded by woods on 3 sides. Not surprisingly, we don't get many visitors out here. In the almost year since we moved in, I've experienced something unusual, an unexplained sense of fear when I'm outside at night. I've lived in wooded areas my entire life, including much more remote locations, but this feels different. These woods don't feel like home, which is strange. Every other place I've lived, the forest was my territory. Here, I feel like an intruder. Something about this land suggests I'm not welcome, like I'm trespassing on someone else's domain. The other night around 11 p.m., I took my dog out for his final walk. Outside the floodlights, everything was pitch black. As we approached the tree line, I heard an odd sound, someone imitating an owl, coming from the barn about 30 yards away. I called out, thinking it was my dad playing a joke, but no one answered. My dog's reaction was what truly unnerved me. Typically friendly and social, he suddenly froze. His hair stood on end, and he began a low, menacing growl, something I'd never seen before. This is a dog who loves everyone, especially my dad, yet now he was intensely focused on something in the darkness. A cold wave of fear washed over me. My dog had stopped right at the edge where light meets shadow, and something didn't feel right. Now, my dog and I were outside at night, trying to see the outline of trees and shrubs. Instead, I was met with a solid wall of black. An owl-like sound suddenly pierced the darkness just a few feet away. My small dog immediately started barking, positioning himself protectively between me and the source of the noise. Instinctively, I scooped him up and ran towards the house. As I fled, I heard the sound again, this time with a strange, almost mocking warble. The next morning, I investigated the barn. The doors were partially broken, hanging off their slides in an unnatural position, as if someone had tried to force them open incorrectly. Despite a thorough search, there were no footprints in the sawdust or dirt, no evidence of any intruder. Now, we always stay within the floodlights after dark. My nephews were visiting my grandparents during their summer break, complaining of boredom. My brother had dropped them off, instructing them to help out and learn some work. Knowing the local warnings about certain areas, the boys' curiosity got the better of them. Their nearby friend didn't help matters. The sheep typically drank water from a windmill, so the boys decided to tell their grandparents the windmill wasn't working, just to see what would happen. There was a mountain pond they'd been strictly warned to avoid. Their grandparents instructed them to take the sheep to the pond and return quickly. They left slowly, trying to hide their excitement, and soon decided to bring their friend along. The journey took over 2 hours. Once the sheep were drinking and resting under some wood, the boys began to explore. They wanted to see what everyone was so afraid of. Crawling almost to the top of the area, they spotted a black smudge in the distance. As they brought the sheep to water, they discovered a waste area with a cave. The older nephew was eager to investigate inside. They walked in, curious about what they might find. Now he ventured deeper into the cave with his friend and little brother hesitant to continue. The space became increasingly narrow, forcing him to crawl on his knees. The cave walls caught his attention. Reddish-brown handprints covered them, and bone fragments littered the floor. As darkness closed in, he remembered the lighter in his pocket. Crawling further, the tunnel eventually opened up, allowing him to stand. The scene around him was horrifying. Smeared handprints covered the walls, and larger bones were scattered everywhere. An overwhelming stench, like rotting roadkill, filled the air. Beads and various skins were strewn about. Rounding a bend, he encountered something terrifying. The mutilated body of a young girl. Her flesh looked torn apart, as if devoured by a dog. Overwhelmed with fear, he quickly retreated. Suddenly, shouts erupted, urging him to escape. As he crawled out, he saw vehicles approaching the mountain. At dusk, they quickly hid behind bushes. Strange groups passed by, old and young men and women, including boys his own age. Once they felt safe, they ran home. The sheep they had been watching were barely moving. Before reaching home, they made a pact of silence about their experience. That night, the older nephew became seriously ill. Hospitalized for days, he suffered terrible nightmares. Unable to cope, he finally told his parents. A 2-day ceremony followed. Missionaries began visiting regularly, and the boys eventually shared their terrifying story. One missionary became so intrigued that he sought to investigate the site himself. I ended up moving to Ohio the other summer to live at this community art house. My personal friends owned it, and they offered me permanent residency if I helped maintain the property. The house was an old Victorian-style home converted into their charity house, situated on one of the highest peaks in the Ohio Valley with a huge wraparound porch. The house was big, 4 stories high, and still required a lot of renovations. The only entrance was through the back door, via the garden, up a flight of stairs leading to the second story. This floor had a narrow, dark hallway with maroon ceilings, containing the kitchen and 4 rooms converted into workshops like sewing and printing spaces. By the kitchen, a stairway led down to the first floor, which was transformed into gallery rooms. Half of this floor became a personal apartment they hoped to rent out. It also provided access to the basement, housing a dark room, screen printing machines, and an exposed toilet with torn-down bathroom walls. The basement had outdoor access with no lock, and my friend's mom even warned me to barricade it at night to prevent intruders. On the second floor, beside the stairwell, a narrow door led up to the attic. Behind it was a beautiful wooden stairwell wrapping upwards to a hall with 5 bedrooms. When I moved in, 2 bedrooms were already rented. Though offered the first floor apartment, I found it creepy and chose a room in the attic instead. One of the other tenants was a 23-year-old poet. I heard later on that he died. I'll have to finish the story another time. The sun is starting to go down. I truly believe they can listen, track you down, and do evil things to you. This was the only inner woods experience I ever had. The day was pretty ordinary until I met some interesting folks. A poet and a 19-year-old girl caught my attention. She seemed quiet but mature, with a conservative demeanor that I found appealing. Near my house, a cemetery stretched along a zigzag road winding up a mountain. One day I hiked to the top alone, taking in the valley view. From one side, I could see the town, but turning around revealed a large building in dense woods. A dirt trail caught my eye, nestled between trees. At first, I thought it might be private property. The path looked well-traveled and just off the main route. As I approached, a bulldozer suddenly appeared from what seemed like a dead end. The driver stopped and looked over at me. "Howdy," he said, catching me off guard. "Worried I might be trespassing?" I apologized. He reassured me there was no issue but added a cryptic warning about creatures in these parts. His smirk suggested something more beneath the surface. Before I could ask further questions, he resumed bulldozing. An old man on a lawnmower then rode up. Over the noise, I called out, "Howdy." He immediately recognized I wasn't local, commenting on my city appearance. When I mentioned being from Chicago, he seemed unsurprised. The old man's toothless grin and the bulldozer driver's mysterious warning lingered in my mind. Something felt unusual about this place, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what made it so strange. I met this guy on the mountain trail. He seemed like a local talker, someone who knows these woods inside and out. He warned me about the area, mentioning all sorts of creatures that roam around. I listened, not in a rush, letting him share his knowledge. He told me he'd lived here his entire life and knew things he could and couldn't explain. His advice was straightforward. Stick to the roads if I'm hiking alone, and watch out for snakes and wolves. Then he dropped something unexpected. He was best friends with the owner of the house I was staying in, who was now buried nearby. He felt like he was still looking out for his friend. The fact that he knew exactly which house I was staying at, without me mentioning it, felt a bit unsettling. After his rambling, he simply wished me luck, and started descending the mountain. I decided not to hit the trail immediately, with plenty of daylight left. Back at the house, I wanted company for the hike. The girl was nowhere to be seen, so I asked the poet if he was interested. He was reading and declined. Just then, the girl appeared in the attic doorway. I'll go with you, she said. The house was too quiet, and she wanted out. The poet suddenly got excited. Let's pack bags, get some rope, see how extreme we can get. I wondered if he was trying to take credit for the idea. But I was just glad for the company. I gathered supplies, rope, gloves, snacks, anything we might need. Throughout this, the poet seemed intent on impressing the girl, who appeared uninterested. Around 3 p.m., we headed up to the cemetery road. By 4 o'clock, we'd reached the top, and the maintenance workers were gone for the evening. The girl grew cautious as we approached the buildings. Are we supposed to be here? Isn't this private property? I reassured her, mentioning my earlier conversation. We were walking, and I noticed a hidden path I'd seen before. This way, I said. The poet looked at me like I was crazy and argued that we should stick to the main road. The girl turned around, visibly upset. She made it clear she could speak for herself and wasn't afraid of a little dirt path. The poet grumbled. We reached what I thought was the trail entrance, but it was just a short dirt clearing about 5 feet long between some trees. That's weird. I thought the trail was longer, I remarked. The poet suggested we return to the main trail to avoid ticks. Standing at the path's edge, the girl pointed ahead. Walking over, I noticed a significant clearing in the woods with many trees cut down. I didn't question it, assuming it was just Ohio industry. A clear path existed, so we decided to follow it. The other guys started complaining, while the girl quietly observed. I led the way, stopping to suggest marking trees so we could find our way back. I took out my knife and carved an X on sturdy growing trees as we passed. After about half a mile, rooftops came into view. As we approached the ledge, we saw a hidden path high in the mountains. From our vantage point, the houses were clearly visible. I glanced down and noticed a house with a light on. Suddenly, a naked woman passed by the window, closing the curtains. An uncomfortable feeling washed over me. Wow, what a view, the girl said. I wonder if anyone knows about this path. The guy asked if we were sticking to this route or heading back up the mountain. No one else seemed bothered by the strange hidden trail. I marked an X where we first found the path, and we continued. It was around 5:30, and the sun was beginning to set. We'd been following this walking path for about an hour when I crossed my path again. Hey, look at this, I said, pointing down. The poet erupted in rage. We'd been wandering this mountain path for over an hour, going in circles. The poet guy finally gives up and heads back to where we started. I don't really care at this point and turn to the girl. She's still gazing down at the town below, silent. Then she speaks, her voice deeper than I remembered. It's like you can watch the whole world and they don't even know somebody is watching them. Her tone sends a chill down my spine. I suggest we follow the poet back up the mountain, and she turns her head in the strangest way possible. If that's what'll make you feel safe, she says. Something feels off. I start climbing on all fours, driven by an unexplained urgency to escape. The sense of danger pulses through me. I reach a precarious ledge and glance down. The girl suddenly looks up, her head twisting unnaturally. She screams, and I swear I see pointed teeth. Terrified, I scramble to another ledge using a fallen tree limb. When I look back, she's vanished. I call out to the poet. No response. A strange X marks the tree that helped my escape. Fuck this, I mutter, sprinting up the path until I reach a forest clearing. I follow the path to a dead end, noticing a 5-foot dirt drop. Panicked, I overshoot it slightly but decide to climb down anyway. As I'm preparing my rope, a hand suddenly covers my mouth and pulls me behind a tree. It's the poet, battered, bloody, covered in cuts and bruises with a black eye. He puts a finger to his lips and points down the path. Now she stood on the path, completely still for about 2 minutes. Then she screamed, but this time it was terrifying. For 30 seconds she began to move strangely, shaking before turning still again. Facing the woods, she said, "I'll meet both of you back at home." Then she walked out into the clearing and down the trail. We waited around 5 minutes before heading down and out, making it back to the cemetery around 7. The man I had encountered earlier was there and said, "I'm glad you took my advice and brought a friend." The poet and I returned to the house, but the girl was gone. Checking her room, we found it looked like nobody had ever lived there. It was almost as if someone had never unpacked or brought anything with them. The room was completely empty. What bothered us was that he had mentioned she always lived here, frequently disappearing and going out late. We wondered if she did this to other people. The poet left town the next day. I stayed in Ohio for about a month. Eventually, I asked the house owners about the residents that week. They told me the poet and I were the only people they knew were staying there. I don't fully understand what happened in the forest or the house or who she was. For the rest of that month, I couldn't do anything without feeling watched. In March or April 2019, I had to travel to Nevada with my dad's side of the family for a funeral. My uncle, who lived in the middle of nowhere with no neighbors, had passed away. My father rented a car, and a day after arriving, we wanted takeout. The closest place was far away, but I was extremely hungry. My dad gave me the rental car keys, a 2017 Honda Civic. Around 9 p.m. I left. The pizza place was about 15 minutes away, and my craving was intense. By 10 p.m., I was driving down a road surrounded only by woods, listening to music at a low volume. Suddenly, I felt a horrible pain in my stomach and an overwhelming sense of uneasiness. That's when the feeling of being watched came over me. Now I was driving down a deserted road at 60 miles per hour when something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Behind my car, just past the trees, was a figure running alongside me. It was at least 7 feet tall, though I couldn't see it clearly. Because I'd heard stories about skinwalkers, I had a sense of what might be happening. I pressed the gas pedal harder, accelerating to over 80 miles per hour. The creature kept pace effortlessly. Panic rising, I pushed the car even faster. Suddenly, I realized I had traveled far up the road, and whatever was chasing me had vanished. I was terrified, paralyzed with fear, and unsure what to do. About 10 feet into the woods, I caught a silhouette moving away. I turned off the music and rolled down the windows. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could hear branches breaking and leaves crushing, though no footsteps were audible. Shaking, I sped to the nearest pizza place. The cashier immediately noticed how pale I was. When I explained what happened, she seemed unsurprised. "It happens semi-often," she said. "Most people just ignore it." She advised that if I saw it again, I should act like it wasn't there. Advice that seemed impossible to follow. Back at my family's place, I shared my experience. My dad was skeptical, dismissing supernatural claims, but my uncle's wife knew different. She confirmed that such encounters were pretty common in the area and shared her own stories of similar experiences. Before I went to bed, she made me promise to tell her if anything strange occurred. Around 3 a.m., I was in the guest bedroom when faint noises from the woods began. Initially, I tried convincing myself it was just wildlife, maybe foxes, but the sounds grew louder with piercing screeches happening every 10 to 20 seconds. My first thought was clear: this wasn't over yet. Here in North Carolina, something's been haunting my hunting grounds. This wasn't just any ordinary wildlife encounter. The night started quietly, no crickets, no owls, total silence. Then came sounds that changed everything. A rabbit squealed, squirrels chirped. My window was cracked open because the heat in my room was unbearable. Initially, I thought it might be a fox or wolf hunting prey, but then I heard a strange noise, like someone slapping raw meat, dripping with ranch dressing. Grabbing my flashlight, I crept toward the window, driven by a mix of terror and curiosity. Something compelled me to look down into the backyard. What I saw was a nightmare beyond imagination. A grey figure with a deer-like head was hunched over a rabbit, impossibly bloody. The creature was methodically sticking its fingers into the rabbit's insides and licking blood off its fingers. When the light hit, it turned and stared directly at me, eyes completely black, without even a hint of reflection. I was frozen. Standing about 7 feet tall, the creature was unnervingly thin. Matted fur covered its body in patches with strange gaps. Its face looked like a pale deer head, chunks of flesh missing. When it opened its mouth, no sound emerged. A headache began building. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My vision blurred, leaving only the creature and my hands in focus. Finally, a scream broke through as I collapsed. My dad and uncle's wife rushed in. Apparently, I just stared and pointed where the creature had been. The rabbit's remains were still present. The next day, I told my dad I wanted to leave. My uncle's wife gathered some unidentified spices, spreading them outside and burning mysterious herbs. Not sage, at least not any sage I recognized. My story is about myself and 3 lifelong friends. Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy who are still close today. I wouldn't be able to tell this story without their help, consent, and shared experiences. Everything here is completely real, with nothing fabricated. During midsummer, around mid-July, we would always make time to visit Kevin's family cabin deep in the Minnesota forest. Since childhood, we typically go with our fathers, including Kevin's dad who owned the cabin. By junior year of high school, we felt mature enough to visit without adult supervision. The cabin was incredibly remote, situated on a small island. The nearest neighboring cabin was at least a quarter to half-mile away, accessible only by a man-made path. To reach the cabin, you'd park on a gravel road across the lake and boat about half a mile over. We experienced something deeply horrifying that night, and we've been hesitant to share it. Afraid of being ridiculed, we're now ready to tell our story. You would have had to be there to truly understand. The incident was so intense that one of my friends suffered a nervous breakdown and required counseling. I've always been a paranormal skeptic, finding it difficult to believe many supernatural claims. Yet, I enjoy exploring these stories with an open mind, which I believe is a sign of personal growth. Whether paranormal or not, something undeniably happened that night. She mentioned I might be connected to ongoing property damage and suggested I might not return. The rest of the trip passed without incident, though I remained unsettled throughout. Apparently, she wanted me to come back in a few months. We'd been to the cabin many times before. It sits on a huge lake, nestled in a quiet wooded area. 2 bedrooms sit side by side, with a connected kitchen and living room. The bathrooms at the back of the cabin. Every room has at least one window without curtains, which made it easy to see outside. My mind always wandered when we stayed here. I'd imagined someone watching from the woods, though nothing ever happened. As I got older, sleeping became easier. This particular trip was just me and a friend staying for 4 or 5 nights. On the 3rd night, we'd set up a campfire and sneaked some beers. Not something I'm proud of, just typical teenage rebellion. We stepped outside to stargaze, enjoying our buzz. Suddenly, we heard a splash near the water. At first, it seemed like a fish jumping. The moonlight helped us see clearly across the lake. Without it, the darkness would have been complete. No city lights for miles. That's when Ryan pointed and asked, "What the hell is that?" About 3/4 of a football field away, something strange floated in the lake. A head, just sitting there, staring. It had long black hair and incredibly pale skin. No distinct features, just a pale blob with dark hair. I'll never forget that moment. My body went rigid. Every hair on my body stood up. We tried to rationalize it, thinking it might be a loon. These birds hunt late, with black and white coats, diving deep into the water. But deep down, we both knew this was something else entirely. One night during our camping trip, something strange caught our attention. While hanging out by the campfire in my friend's cabin, we first noticed an odd black circular object in the lake. It seemed motionless, just sitting there in the water. The object was particularly unnerving. It wasn't moving at all, which struck us as weird. When I went outside to use the bathroom, I realized it was even closer than before, maybe about 30 yards away now. As I looked more closely, I could make out what seemed like a pale face, with a distinctive nose that appeared untouched by sunlight for years. The whole scene was deeply unsettling. We all gathered outside to look, and the object remained in the exact same spot, its head tilted upward as if watching us. Nobody wanted to go near the dock anymore. We quickly retreated inside, trying to rationalize what we were seeing. We initially convinced ourselves it was just a log, but something felt off. A loon wouldn't stay in one place for nearly an hour, and there were no ripples in the water around this strange object. The lack of movement was profoundly unnatural. Later that night, with the windows open to combat the summer heat, I took one final look outside. The black object had completely vanished. A wave of relief washed over me, thinking it must have drifted away or reached the shore. Despite our attempts to dismiss it, we all knew something peculiar had happened that night by the lake. Tommy slept in the living room while my 2 other friends slept in 2 separate bedrooms with their doors open, not being able to sleep but keeping my eyes shut tight. Suddenly, I began hearing someone walking around at the bottom of the stairs in the cabin. Whoever was down there had moved off the dock, pacing back and forth with boot-like clicks on the wood. It seemed like they weren't sure what to do with themselves. This went on for about 3 minutes. I wanted to whisper to my buddy but remained frozen in fear, keeping my eyes closed and ears fully alert. The footsteps unexpectedly took 2 steps up the deck stairs, but then quickly turned around, sounding like they were sprinting out down the man-made path. After the steps seemed to disappear and a few minutes passed, I woke Tommy up to ask if he'd heard the steps. We both sat up. I was startled to see Ryan walking out of his room, saying we needed to leave just a minute after the steps vanished. He must have heard us talking and felt he could come out. Something was deeply disturbing about his expression. Ryan woke up Kevin and urgently said, "Let's go." We got to the boat. When we asked what was wrong, he explained quickly while gathering his belongings. Ryan had seen something terrifying. In the top right corner of his window, he spotted a figure with one eye, white skin, and long black hair that quickly shifted out of view. Looking back, we realized this thing was nearly 8 feet tall, standing on something like bricks or possibly floating, peering into the room where he was sleeping. "Let's go," Ryan repeated seriously. His intensity disturbed us deeply. I told him about the steps my friend and I heard in the living room. We all agreed and packed up immediately, breaking our usual routine of cleaning the cabin before leaving. As we headed down the stairs, we discovered footprints in the dirt. Something unexplained had been in the cabin with us. No, we were heading back from the cabin, our pace quickened by an underlying sense of unease. Something felt off. We hastily loaded our stuff onto the boat, untied it, and sped away. I deliberately avoided looking into the water, hoping to push away memories of the strange sight I'd witnessed earlier. Our eyes were fixed on the island, scanning for any movement, but nothing caught our attention. Once we had packed everything into the car and secured the boat, we drove off. About 10 miles into our journey, Ryan suddenly broke down, sobbing and asking what he had seen outside the window. We called our parents to explain the situation. They advised us to just get home safely and quickly. By 5 o'clock in the morning, no one had slept, and the ride was eerily quiet. The following weekend, my friend's dad went to the cabin and reported no unusual experiences. However, he did mention finding lingering footprints around the property, which struck him as strange and somewhat irritating. Ryan was deeply affected by whatever he saw. He struggled with sleep afterward and needed medication and some professional help. Over time, he recovered, but he remains uncomfortable sleeping near windows without curtains. I can't explain the events of that night or what I saw in the lake. Nothing has happened at the cabin since, according to my friend's dad. While Tommy and Kevin have returned without incident, Ryan and I remain hesitant. Given the number of cabins on the island, it could have been a prank that was interrupted. Or perhaps something more sinister was planned. The combination of the lake incident, mysterious footprints, and someone watching Ryan at night seems too coincidental to dismiss. Despite feeling okay now, the experience continues to puzzle me. I took a trip to stay in a cabin high up in the mountains of Ranger, Georgia. The neighborhood was 30 minutes away from civilization, with cabins spread far apart. The front deck was completely exposed to the woods, meaning any animals could easily wander through. For about a week, my partner and I sat outside on the front deck late into the night. We never felt in danger. Each evening was peaceful, filled with fireflies and the sounds of crickets. But the 5th night was different. It was around midnight, with the moon heavily obscured. The forest suddenly went completely quiet and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I tried to rationalize my growing fear, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Then my girlfriend said she felt unsafe too. Suddenly, we heard a blood-curdling scream. Using a flashlight, we discovered it was a grey fox. What struck us as odd was how the fox was running with its ears and tail down, appearing terrified. I knew foxes typically scream during mating season in winter, and this was June. Something seemed wrong. The cabin had 3 floors, and we climbed out the window onto the roof, hoping to remain outside and relax. But no matter how high up we were, I felt an overwhelming presence of evil. This feeling was similar to other paranormal experiences I'd had in a haunted house. Georgia doesn't often have mountain lions, maybe the occasional bear, but this didn't feel like a typical animal encounter. The sensation was distinctly sinister. Years earlier, I met a retired Navajo police chief from the 70s who shared some insights about such experiences. The memory of that night in the mountains remained etched in my mind, a story I will never forget. Seeing a floating head in the distance from your house or waking up to find one outside your window would be truly terrifying. Navajo native, I have grown up hearing countless stories on the reservation. While I've never personally witnessed anything supernatural, I've been fortunate to hear first-hand accounts from those who have. One police officer shared what he considered the strangest incident of his career. He was called to a shooting near Church Rock, New Mexico in the Gallup area. Upon arrival, he found a family in complete distress. According to their account, a large creature walking on two legs had entered their yard after opening the gate. They shot at it, and the creature cried out like a human before fleeing towards the railroad tracks. Another Gallup police officer arrived at the scene. Together, they tracked a blood trail along the railroad tracks, which led them to a large cedar tree. Deep within the branches, they discovered something unusual. Examining the body closely, they found a young native girl with long black hair. Her upper body appeared human, but her lower body was distorted and almost dog-like. The body was painted and adorned with feathers. Shocked by their discovery, they called it in and performed an autopsy. Despite their efforts, they couldn't identify the girl or her tribal affiliation. A public announcement was made on broadcast, and the body was even displayed in a glass case, hoping someone would claim her. Yet, no one came forward. Eventually, the body was removed from display, and its final fate remains unknown. The officer eventually left the police force, citing this incident and similar unexplained events as his reason. He believed that native police rangers and emergency medical technicians often encounter the most bizarre stories because they are usually the first responders. Interestingly, many people reportedly visited the Gallup police station in the 1970s to view the Skinwalker body. Descriptions consistently portrayed her as a young, beautiful native girl with long black hair. The silence surrounding her remained profound. Nobody wanted to draw attention to such matters. Most significantly, her family never claimed her, which was understood. Everyone knows skinwalkers are deeply rooted in family connections. Not in the quiet high deserts and deep canyons of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and southern Colorado, an ancient evil resides. The Navajo people have long been aware of this presence, maintaining helpful ceremonies, rituals, and traditions that continue to this day. Some local hospitals even keep an on-duty medicine man. Yet, there's a darker side to these supernatural beliefs. Black magic exists, though most Navajo won't openly discuss it. This superstition isn't unique to the Navajo. It's common among First Nation peoples from Alaska to Argentina. The fear of attracting unwanted spirits or harmful entities runs deep. Skinwalkers and Nadroshi are terrifying stories that have haunted many nights. One particular encounter involves a Navajo tribal police officer driving along what was once Highway 666 during a light snowfall, significant for his homeland. On this night, the officer spots an elderly woman walking along the roadside in traditional dress. A long dress, shawl, and hair neatly bundled in a bun. While it wasn't unusual for elders to dress traditionally, her presence in such cold, late-night conditions seemed strange. After passing her, the officer decides to turn around, but when he returns, the woman has vanished. On the flat terrain, he's certain of what he saw. Stepping out with his flashlight, he discovers her footprints in the snow. Following them, he's shocked to see the prints suddenly transform into dog tracks, quickly leading away from the road. Shaken, he meets another officer and shares the experience. His colleague isn't surprised. These encounters are known, sometimes an old woman, sometimes a beautiful young girl, always appearing on the road, always in snow, waiting for a good Samaritan. Now, the narrator admits to feeling nervous driving these open spaces at night. Eyes fixed on the road, music blaring, hitchhikers are never picked up. Growing up on the reservation, our traditions run deep. We guard our stories carefully, especially those that whisper of darker realities. Evil exists in ways most people can't understand. Skinwalkers, wendigos, spirits that corrupt minds. These aren't just campfire tales. They're real, and I've seen evidence. My tribal community knows these truths intimately. Strange occurrences are part of our landscape. Unnatural whistles echo through back hills at night. Shadows move unnaturally between trees. Black, misshapen creatures prowl. Owls perch silently, watching houses for hours. During high school, I attended a native-only school where rumors constantly circulated. Most were just stories meant to scare, but not this time. Something horrific happened that would shock everyone. A young man from the pueblo of Jemez murdered another, someone he'd called a friend. The details emerged slowly during lunch hour. He had brutally killed his companion, then sat calmly with his face painted, seemingly unaffected by his actions. Don't ever hitchhike near Highway 66. A skinwalker might be waiting, ready to take you home. This isn't just a story. This is a warning. Not something evil had taken over. That's what everyone was saying about the horrific murder that shocked the Hums PBLO reservation and surrounding Pueblo communities. Matthew Panama, just 21 years old, was killed in a way that defied explanation. The details were brutal and terrifying. The killer had reportedly disemboweled the body and painted Matthew's face black and white, as if performing some kind of satanic sacrificial ceremony. When the news broke, it was almost impossible to believe. Weeks after the incident, the impact continued to reverberate. The Pueblo of Hums took drastic measures, bringing in medicine men from across the region to perform a massive cleansing ceremony. During what should have been a normal trick-or-treating season, they were instead trying to purge an overwhelming sense of evil. Local beliefs suggested the killer might have been possessed. Some compared the incident to encounters with a skinwalker or some form of dark curse. The Pueblo have specific traditional understanding of such supernatural forces, and many believed a malevolent spirit had completely overtaken the murderer's mind. This wasn't just another crime. This was something deeper, something more sinister. Court documents and news reports confirmed the gruesome details. While it might sound like a paranormal story, everything about this case was terrifyingly real. The core message remained clear. Be cautious about who you trust. Be aware of the beliefs and influences surrounding you. Evil can manifest in ways we might never expect. I apologize, but the text you provided seems to be incomplete or cut off. Could you please provide the full original text that you want me to rewrite? Without the complete context, I cannot accurately rewrite the script while preserving its original meaning.